Born under the whip of the icy northern winds, Sten never imagined that the blood that pulsed through his veins carried an ancestral burden. Since he was a child, he felt something different inside him, a dark impetus, a force that awakened when anger took hold. On the battlefield, this fury became unstoppable, transforming him into a true demon of war. But what seemed like a gift soon proved to be a curse. Warriors and kings saw in him not a man, but a living weapon, forged in madness and brutality. His destiny was not his own. Legends spoke of ancient warriors, the berserkers, who fought without fear, without pain, without humanity. Sten was one of them, even though he had never chosen that path. The chains that bound him were not of iron, but of blood and legacy. His name spread like a whisper of terror through villages and fortresses, and he was thrown into the war like a hungry wolf, with no right to rest, no right to his own soul. With each battle won, he felt less human, more like a beast. Until one day, he realized that the only war he needed to fight was against those who used him as a machine of destruction. It was then that, in the silence of a moonless night, Sten whispered the name of Hel, the goddess of death. Not as a plea, but as a call. He did not want redemption. He wanted power. Enough to overthrow his masters, to break his chains, to free himself from a destiny he never chose. And Hel heard him. But every gift from the gods exacts its price, and what she asked in return would seal Sten's fate for all eternity. Sten was born in a remote village in the northern Icelands, where the sea beat against the cliffs like a ceaseless war drum. His father, Ulfgar, was a hunter and blacksmith, a man of few words and unshakable strength. His mother, Sigrid, was a respected healer, knowledgeable in the ancient rites and herbs that could save a life or take it. From an early age, Sten grew up among blades and prayers, among hunts and whispered secrets around campfires. But there was something about him that not even his parents could understand, a raw, ferocious energy that set him apart from other boys. As the years passed, his strength became uncommon. Even as a teenager, he could fell grown men as easily as he chopped logs. His body withstood the cold without shivering, and his wounds healed too quickly. When he had completed 15 winters, he was taken on his first raid, where he discovered the true weight of the axe in his hands. Where others hesitated, he charged forward. As veteran warriors retreated, he bathed in the carnage as if destined for it. His fame grew, and soon his elders began to whisper that his fury was not his alone, but something older, something buried deep in the roots of the past. It was then that, on a rainy night, a village elder approached the hearth where Sten sharpened his blade. With a gaze heavy with centuries and a voice full of foreboding, the old man told him the truth. His blood was not that of a hunter or a common warrior. He was descended from a man whose exploits were written in the sagas and feared even by the gods. A berserker who, long ago, had marched into enemy lands without fear of death, destroying everything in his path. The blood of that warrior pulsed within him, and the fury that consumed him was but the inheritance of a power that should never have been forgotten. Havard the Reaper was a name whispered with fear, even among the most brutal warriors. His birth carried a dark omen. It is said that he was born in a storm that engulfed half the coastal village where his mother lived. Lightning split the sky as he let out his first cry, and the elders swore they saw ravens alight on the rooftops, watching as if they knew something great and terrible had just happened. His father, a ruthless Jarl, saw in him not a son but a weapon, and molded him from an early age for war. By 10 winters, Havard was wielding an axe. By 13, he had killed his first man in combat. But it was in his first great battle, against the South Saxons, that his true nature revealed itself. The battle should have been a massacre for the Vikings. The Saxons were more numerous, better trained, protected by shield walls that seemed insurmountable. But as Havard's berserker rage took hold, he became something more than flesh and bone. His eyes turned white as morning mist, his bronze skin flushed with exertion, and his strength defied logic. He charged forward alone, splitting shields in half, cracking skulls with his bare hands, tearing flesh like paper. The once disciplined Saxons began to retreat, terror written all over their faces. Some threw themselves to the ground, begging the Christian gods for mercy. But Havard would not listen to prayers. He was an envoy of destruction. It was said that his rage came not from training or anger alone, but from something deeper, something that flowed in his blood. He was a berserker in the purest sense, one of those rare chosen by the gods of war. Many believed that Odin had touched him, that Tyr himself guided his blade. Others, more fearful, said that his strength came not from Asgard, but from Helheim, that he fought not with the gods, but against them. The truth, no one knew for sure. What they did know was that he never fell. Even when wounded, even when surrounded, he remained standing, advancing, killing. And so it was until his last battle, when he faced 50 warriors alone and fell, finally, riddled with spears and swords. But not even death defeated him easily. It is said that with his last breath, he laughed, as if he knew a secret that no one else understood. Sten was his direct descendant, son of the bloodline that should never have continued. Havard died without leaving children, or so it was believed. But in secret, before his final battle, he had spent a single night with a mysterious woman, a seer who saw beyond the veils of time. From this forbidden union had come a son whose lineage had been hidden for generations, until it finally reached Sten. The Havard blood had never disappeared. It had merely waited, dormant, until it found someone strong enough to carry it. And now, that blood pulsed through Sten's veins, crying out to be awakened. The first stirrings of the berserker rage began as a whisper in Sten's mind, something he did not fully understand, but which manifested itself in his dreams as visions of battle and blood. However, it was only when tragedy struck at his door that this ancient power truly awakened. One day, while hunting in the dense forests surrounding his village, Sten heard distant screams. His heart raced. When he ran back, he found his village under attack. Warriors from a rival clan, known for their cruelty, were looting the houses and dragging women and children away as slaves. The smell of burning wood and blood filled the air. His father, a seasoned warrior, tried to fight back, but was cut down before his eyes. The shock was so great that something inside Sten snapped. A guttural scream emerged from his throat, unlike any human sound. His vision became tinged with red, and a wave of heat coursed through his body. His muscles seemed to swell, becoming harder than rock. He felt no fear, only an uncontrollable thirst for destruction. Without thinking, he grabbed a fallen axe and advanced on the invaders with superhuman speed. The first man to face him had his skull crushed before he could raise his blade. The second had his chest torn from side to side. Sten fought without technique, but with a fury that made his attacks unstoppable. Blades pierced his skin, but he felt no pain. Each blow he received only fueled his frenzy. When the battle was over, the bodies of his enemies were scattered across the ground, and Sten remained standing, panting, covered in blood, but without a single scratch that made him fall. The survivors of his village looked at him with horror and admiration. His mother, even devastated by her husband's death, understood in that moment that the blood of her ancestors truly ran strong in her son. It was the same power that had inhabited the legendary berserker of his lineage, the one who, centuries before, had terrorized entire kingdoms. But Sten had no time to process what had happened. The next day, rumors began to spread. In distant taverns, Talk of a young man who had single-handedly massacred an army reached the ears of a powerful king, a ruthless conqueror, who saw in this young man unsurpassed potential. If a single man was capable of such destruction, what could he do under the banner of a great army? The king wasted no time. With a retinue of well-armed men, he set out in search of Sten, willing to offer him land, gold, and women. But his true goal was one: to transform the young berserker into the most lethal weapon the world had ever seen. When the king arrived at Sten's village, he brought not only soldiers, but a large retinue, a retinue of knights and emissaries, and the imposing brilliance of his royal robes contrasted with the devastated landscape of the village. A cold wind cut through the morning air as the king and his band of warriors approached Sten's house. He was led to the young berserker, who was still immersed in his doubts about his newfound power. The king, mounted on a huge black steed, descended with surprising elegance for someone of his size and presence. His clothes, adorned with precious metals and exotic animal skins, reflected the light in an almost hypnotic way. With a calculated smile, he approached Sten, who stood on the edge of a recently experienced battlefield, his hands still trembling with anger. "I have heard of you, young Sten," the king said in a deep voice, like the thunder of an approaching storm. "They say your rage is unstoppable, and that death follows you like a shadow. I have a proposition that can change the fate of everyone around you. You have the power to rule, to be more than just a man. You can be the right hand of a king, if you so desire." Those words were not just an invitation, but a promise. The king knew what he was doing. He had seen, in many other men, how power could be shaped and directed to build empires. And Sten, with his unparalleled strength, would be no different. However, Sten was not so easily impressed. Even in front of the king, with all the gold and riches around him, the young berserker felt uneasy. He did not know if what was being offered was truly a gift or a gilded prison. The blood of his ancestors still boiled in his veins, and he could not ignore the feeling that his rage was being bought, used as a commodity. For 3 days, Sten remained silent, isolated, thoughtful. During the long nights, he would wander away from the royal entourage and ponder the king's words. The wind carried with it whispers of the past and the future, as if nature itself were urging him to accept the proposal. The days passed, and while the king waited, Sten struggled with his own emotions and the temptation of glory. He knew that he could not live only in search of battles, that he could not be a murderer driven only by rage. But he also knew that this was the only way to maintain his freedom. The king offered him lands, but also power. He spoke of a kingdom where Sten could have everything his heart desired: jewels, weapons forged by masters, and women from the most beautiful lands. Nothing seemed to be lacking, but the greatest promise was that of fighting. The king offered him a war without end, a war that could make him eternal in the memory of men. At the end of the 3rd day, Sten made a decision. He had seen the rage consume the men in his village, and he feared that it would happen to him if he did not find a greater cause. Accepting the king's proposal did not mean surrendering himself, but conquering his destiny. He approached the royal entourage, where the king was waiting for him with a triumphant smile. "Have you made your decision?" the king asked, a gleam in his eyes. "Yes," Sten replied, his voice grave, filled with a determination that still surprised him. "I will fight by your side." The king then gave the order for Sten to be taken immediately to his kingdom. Upon arriving at the king's castle, Sten was received like a true legend. The throne room was adorned with tapestries of past battles and symbols of power. The king, with a smile, showed him the jewels and gold, the armor that gleamed in the torchlight. Sten was led to a large room, where graceful women awaited him, with curious and fascinated looks. But Sten knew that these gifts were only a reflection of the real war that awaited him. He already felt the flame of battle in his heart, but there was something else too. The shadow of fury, which now accompanied him, always lurking. The king, pleased with Sten's decision, promised him what he desired most: constant fighting, a chance to prove his worth, and above all, the opportunity to write his name in history. "You will fight for me," the king said, "and together we will conquer entire kingdoms. You will be remembered not only as a berserker, but as the man who destroyed empires and forged his own destiny." But what the king did not know was that by making this promise, he had drawn Sten into a game he could not control. The young berserker, now under his tutelage, had a thirst for power that the king barely understood. The war, which had seemed like a tale of glory, would soon become a nightmare for everyone around him. Sten's first battle under the banner of the great King Magnus was an event that would be etched into the Viking sagas for generations. Magnus, in his quest to expand his domains, had set his sights on a small but strategic region to the south, the kingdom of Arona. This land, rich in precious metals and natural resources, was ruled by a weak and isolationist monarch, whose defenses were known to be not as strong as the king believed. So it was Sten's turn, the young berserker, to prove his worth and his fury on the front lines of battle. The battlefield was set on an open plain, near a dense forest, where the wind cut through the icy air and the trees seemed to whisper secrets of ancient lands. Magnus's army prepared for battle, and Sten stood among the throng of warriors. He still felt the weight of responsibility, but the ancient fury pulsed within him, like a flame ready to be lit. King Magnus, his armor gleaming and his gaze steady, watched his soldiers with the confidence of a man accustomed to victory. But he knew that the true test would be Sten. In Sten, the king had found the kind of strength that could destroy entire armies. Throughout the 3 days of marching, Sten spoke little, focused only on the coming battle. He knew that destiny awaited him here, on this battlefield, and that his ancestors expected to be honored with his power. The night before the battle was filled with murmurs and shouts that echoed through the tents of the warriors. But Sten kept to himself, as he usually did. He sat alone, his eyes lost in the flames of a fire dancing before him, as he felt the rising vortex of his own fury. The next morning, Arona's army was already preparing on the opposite hills. The sky was overcast, the air thick with the tension of a war about to break out. The archers of Arona were lined up in ranks, and behind them, the infantry forces awaited the order to advance. King Magnus gave his order in a firm, booming voice, and the war drums began to beat. Magnus' army marched toward the enemy, with Sten at the forefront, like a wall of iron and fury. The battle began with the clang of shields and the sharp sound of arrows cutting through the air. But it was Sten who, with his imposing presence, turned the tide of the confrontation. He was the first to invade the front line, like a wild storm. The warriors of Arona were terrified when they saw this immense man advancing toward them, blood gushing from his veins as if he were lava about to swallow everything in his path. His sword, weighted by generations of berserkers, cut through flesh and steel with impressive ease, and Sten's scream was like the roar of a wild animal, a true manifestation of the ancient fury he carried. The Arona men, unprepared for such a savage force, were quickly decimated. Sten knew no word for mercy. He charged forward, slashing, crushing, destroying everything in his path. Around him, Magnus's warriors followed him with renewed confidence, inspired by the sight of the young berserker in action. The battle was no longer about strategy, but about the sheer will to destroy. Sten seemed to feed on the death around him, and with each enemy that fell, he grew stronger, more immense. When Sten finally reached the Arona commander, a tall man with an ornate helmet and a long sword. The battle seemed already decided. The commander tried to resist, but Sten's fury was unstoppable. In a single blow, the young berserker decapitated his opponent and held his head up to the sky as a trophy of his victory. His eyes were ablaze, and the audience of warriors could do nothing but stare in amazement at the power Sten displayed. The Arona army, leaderless and lacking the courage to continue, quickly surrendered, and King Magnus had no choice but to secure victory. The effects of the battle were profound. Sten's victory was a turning point, not only for Magnus's kingdom, but for Sten himself. He felt for the first time the true weight of his heritage and the responsibility of being a king's weapon. Magnus's men celebrated him as a hero, but for Sten, something inside him was breaking. He knew that with every life he took, with every battle he fought, he was distancing himself from his true self. The fury coursing through his veins was becoming a reflection of the emptiness forming within him. That night, King Magnus called him to his tent, offering him jewels and gifts, but Sten only accepted them in silence. Magnus was pleased with his victory, but he knew that Sten's true loyalty still had to be earned. Sten, for his part, was still conflicted. The battle was not over for him, but had only just begun. He knew that more battles awaited him soon, and he did not yet know if he could control the monster growing within him. As they looked out over the horizon, where the sun was setting, both men knew that this was only the beginning of Sten's journey, and that many battles would still come. 3 years had passed since Sten's first great victory, and the young berserker's life had become unrecognizable. Under the banner of King Magnus, he had become an unstoppable force, a true weapon forged in the heat of battle. His deeds were legend among warriors, and the land bowed before his power. Sten's name echoed across many kingdoms, not as the name of a man, but as a specter of death, a warning that destruction was about to come. As time passed, Sten conquered more lands and crushed more enemies, each battle becoming more brutal and merciless. But as his victories piled up, something began to eat away at Sten's soul. The berserker rage that had once seemed like a blessing now seemed like a curse. He no longer felt alive, but an extension of the steel and blood spilled by his sword. The young warrior, who had once dreamed of glory and adventure, began to question everything he had achieved. The land he had conquered, the gold and gifts given by King Magnus, the women and the riches, all of it seemed empty. What, after all, was he seeking in so many battles? As his conquests increased, the feeling of being trapped in an endless cycle intensified. The weight of each life he took consumed him, and with each new battlefield, he felt a part of his humanity slipping away. The nights became moments of solitude, where the echo of blades and the screams of the victims of his battles haunted his dreams, leaving him restless and unable to rest. It was on one of these lonely nights, as the winds howled against the walls of Magnus Castle, that Sten decided to set out in search of something he did not know exactly what it was. He felt an urgent need to find a purpose that was more than killing, to find an answer to the emptiness that was beginning to consume his spirit. There was something in his heart that called him beyond war, something that fate seemed to have hidden from him until now. He did not know where to look for the answer, but something in his instinct told him that the answer lay in the shadows, in the depths of the earth, where few dared to go. During the years of battle, Sten had heard rumors of an entity, a goddess who inhabited the recesses of the underworld. Hel, the goddess of death, was known for her immeasurable wisdom and power, and many said that she had the power to grant a new destiny to those who sought her favor. For those who were lost, as he was, Hel was a symbol of revelation, an entity who offered answers to those who dared to search the depths of the unknown. But these stories were whispered in the shadows and considered only myths by many. With no more time to waste, Sten decided to follow his own path. He left Magnus Castle and set out for the ends of the world, where the lands became increasingly inhospitable, where men no longer dared to live. He walked for weeks, through dense forests and icy mountains, guided only by instinct and the growing feeling that he was being drawn by something greater than himself. Loneliness consumed him, but at the same time, there was an inner strength, like a flame that grew with each step. His journey took him to a vast cavern, where the air was filled with a strong and unusual smell, a mixture of earth and decay. The entrance to the cavern was covered in ancient symbols and runes, traces of a lost time and a forgotten power. Legend spoke of the entrance to the realm of hell, and Sten, without hesitation, crossed the threshold of the cavern, not knowing what awaited him within. The path inside the cavern seemed endless. Darkness enveloped him, and the only light came from his own inner flames. Deep within the cavern, he found a large hall, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb the light around it. In the center of this hall, an imposing figure stood, shrouded in dense shadows. Her eyes, like two deep holes of darkness, shone with an ancient, unnameable power. She sat on a throne of bones, surrounded by a silence that seemed to weigh down existence itself. It was Hel, the goddess of the underworld. Her countenance was morbidly beautiful, and at the same time, there was something fascinating about her presence, something that made Sten feel an uncontrollable reverence. Her hair, black as night, fell in waves, and her penetrating gaze seemed to pierce Sten's soul, as if she knew his most intimate thoughts, his fears and his anguish. She looked at him with an expression that was not one of judgment, but of profound knowledge. "You have come to me, young warrior," Hel said in a voice that seemed to resonate in the very air, like a distant echo from an immemorial past. "You carry in your heart the fury of your ancestors, but also the weight of death that you bring with you. You live to kill, but what is behind your blades? What do you truly seek in all this?" Sten did not know what to say. He was before something far beyond anything he had ever known in his life. His sword, always full of blood and victory, now seemed like a purposeless object. He had lost himself in a world of destruction, and the truth Hel spoke was clear in his mind. "I seek," he began, but the words failed him. "I seek something I cannot name. I no longer know what to do with the strength I carry. I no longer know who I am." Hel smiled, a smile that was not of malice, but of understanding. "You came to me because you know that fury, without purpose, only destroys. You know that, somewhere in your being, there is something more. I can show you the way, but the price will be high." Sten looked at the goddess, feeling the weight of her words. What did he want? What was he willing to sacrifice? He did not know yet, but one thing was certain. He could no longer continue the way he was. Something inside him was ready to be transformed. But what would that mean? He would only know when he faced the choice that now lay before him. Hel looked deep into his eyes, and silence hung over them, as if the decision he made would define not only his fate, but the future of everyone around him. The cave was silent, and the air seemed to pulse with the energy of a power that Sten barely understood. The presence of Hel before him, that immortal entity, made the weight of his decisions fall on his shoulders like an unbearable burden. She, the goddess of the underworld, had the power to shape destinies, to alter the course of his life and even his death. "You have come to me, warrior," Hel said, her voice echoing in the depths of the cave. "I can give you what you desire. I can free you from this prison of blood and fury. But the price will be high." Sten felt the weight of her words digging into his heart, like a sharp blade. The emptiness that consumed him was deep, and the search for the answer seemed to be the only possible path. He no longer felt anything for the life of war he led, for the blood-stained fields and the bodies of his fallen enemies. Everything had become a repetition, a torture, and he knew that he could not continue like this. "I accept," Sten said, his voice husky and resolute. "I accept your pact, Hell. End this cycle. Let me destroy those who enslave me, and I will do whatever you ask of me in return, for all eternity." Hell regarded him with a cold gaze, but at the same time, something in her eyes reflected an ancient curiosity. She knew Sten was not doing this just for revenge. He was seeking release, something that had never been given to a berserker. He no longer wanted to be the beast of war that Magnus had forged him into. He wanted to be something more. The goddess of the underworld understood this, and that was why she accepted his pact. "Then the pact is sealed. You will destroy Magnus and his empire, and I will take you to the underworld when your work is done. You will no longer be a slave to war, but a servant of destiny, in my hands." The moment Hell's words faded into the air, a surge of power washed over Sten. He felt the fury of his ancestors intensify within him, as if the blood of all the berserkers past was coursing through his veins. He was no longer just Sten, the young warrior. He was a raging animal, a storm about to break loose upon those who had used and destroyed him. The transformation was inevitable. With a guttural roar, Sten turned and left the cave. Every step he took seemed to shake the earth, and his body burned with an unbearable energy. He felt as if he were being consumed by a fury that could no longer be controlled. His mission was clear: to destroy Magnus and his empire. His revenge was no longer for himself alone, but for all those who, like him, had been shaped by war, destruction, and relentless rage. When he reached the gates of Magnus' kingdom, the sight of the imposing castle, with its high walls and the soldiers in position, was enough to ignite the flame of rage within him. Without hesitation, Sten charged forward with a ferocious roar that echoed through the surrounding hills. His muscles were tense, his heart pounding with the fury of 1,000 battles. He was no longer human, no longer the warrior who had fought for a purpose. Now he was a force of nature, a creature of destruction. King Magnus' soldiers, upon seeing Sten approaching, tried to organize a defense, but there was no stopping the immeasurable strength he carried within him. Like an avalanche, he advanced, knocking down everything in his path. His fists, like hammers of destruction, crushed armor and bodies with ease. His sword cut through the air with deadly precision, and in an instant, those who dared to oppose him fell dead at his feet. He no longer felt remorse, nor compassion. He was pure fury, a relentless beast on a quest for destruction. The walls of Magnus' castle crumbled before his might, and the entire city became a bloody battlefield, with screams of despair and the clash of blades. Women, children, soldiers, and warriors, all fell before him, with no thought of sparing a single one. His sole purpose was to obliterate everything Magnus and his followers stood for. When he finally found Magnus, the great king, he was inside his palace, surrounded by his advisors and guards. Magnus, who had once treated him as an ally, now found himself facing a monster of his own making. Sten entered the hall, his eyes burning with rage, and Magnus, recognizing the look in his former warrior's eyes, tried to speak, trying to bargain with him, offering riches, lands, and even power in the name of an eternal alliance. "You don't understand, Magnus," Sten said, his voice deep and filled with hatred. "I don't want any more of this. I don't want to be your weapon anymore. Today, you pay for what you did, for my soul, for my life, and for all those who made me who I am." With one brutal movement, Sten lunged forward, his sword slicing through the air and piercing the king's chest, leaving him to fall to the ground with a choked scream. And so, the great King Magnus died, his life consumed by the fury of Sten, a man who was no longer a man, but a demon unleashed to wreak havoc. The castle, the kingdom, and everything Magnus had built lay in ruins. Magnus' empire had been consumed by fire and death. Nothing remained but ash, bodies, and a deep silence. The battle was over, and Sten, his purpose fulfilled, fell to his knees, exhausted and wounded. He looked around, feeling that there was nothing left for him. The fury that had consumed him now drained away, leaving him empty, a man without purpose, with no reason to continue. Death was not long in coming. With a final breath, Sten fell to the ground, his life taken by the exhaustion of battle. But unlike a man who dies in battle and disappears forever, Sten's body was taken by a supernatural force. The earth split open, and from the ground a shadow emerged, a presence that Sten had already recognized. It was Hel, the goddess of the underworld. She watched him with a serene gaze, as if she already knew that this was the end he would face. Wordlessly, she reached out her hand, and Sten felt his body being pulled into the abyss, into the underworld. The pain of his death, the sadness of his choices, all of it disappeared as he merged with the darkness, being taken to the realm of the dead. And so, Sten, the berserker who had been a weapon of war, now became an eternal servant of Hel, the goddess of the underworld. He would no longer be a slave of war, but would serve the goddess in a new role, destined to live an eternity in the realm of death. But something in his spirit, a spark of freedom, had finally found peace. He had done what he had to do, and now he was where his destiny had taken him. He would no longer be a war slave, but an eternal being, serving in the shadows, in a destiny granted to him by a pact sealed in the darkness. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues.